Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn more about what we do, head over to officehours.global. Our first hour, we answer your questions on virtual productions and media. And our second hour is something that we typically want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we'll be speaking with Todd Harris with Skillshot on the business of esports. And producers, feel free to submit your questions so that over the next hour, we'll be able to answer them with our great panelists here today. Speaking of panelists, Bill, let's get this party started.
All right. Our first question this morning comes from Douglas Carmichael this morning, if you're where I am. When wiring a home with Ethernet lines to each room, how many cables should you run per room? And how would a cabling contractor most likely quote the price for the job?
Let's start with Jason.
I couldn't possibly answer the latter part because I've never been a cabling contractor, but I've designed a fair number of these at this point, and my answer is between 1 and 4. Any more than that, and I think it's just completely excessive. And, you don't need Ethernet in the bathroom. I can say that safely.
John?
The smart toilets are coming. You're going to need Ethernet for those. You don't want to be relying on Wi-Fi. I would do at least 2 runs for each room. You're going to get charged $100 to $150 per run. Typically is what it's going to look like for you.
And Peter?
I'll go with what I did actually was for all the major rooms. So not the bathroom, Jason, but all the major rooms. I did 2 in opposite corners of each room. So, the northwest corner and the southeast corner of the room, so to speak, had 2 drops come in. And I'm with John. I think it was 115 they charged me per drop to do that, all running back to a central location for a switch.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I live in a condo, so I'll keep that in mind in the process. You only really need 1 Ethernet cable, but you want to have 2 because 1 could get broken. So now you got 2. Now you also have to think, well, if you have DirecTV, you probably need an RG6 run. Got that. Maybe fiber for the future. Got that. So it's just sort of looking at a crystal ball to prepare for any eventuality. Because in my place, I've got the bedroom's a major media room. The media room is a major media room. And then I have my upstairs studio where we are right now, and everything sort of terminates here. So in a condo, it's really complicated because you got to bust down walls to get the wires run through the walls.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, there's a bundle of cables we use, which has all different types of cables in it. I can't remember the name, but I've asked somebody, and when I get it, I will share it with you. You'll pay per run, but you have to understand that it depends the state of the house. If you've just framed your house and there are no walls, that's a lot cheaper than if this is a walled and a finished house. So expect the price to be different depending on where you're asking them to run.
Does the age of the house matter? Like, does that impact?
It does, but mostly as if we're wiring a brand new house and there's no walls up yet, then it's a pretty easy thing to do. But we will want to know a design. Where do you want the speakers? Where do you want the TV? Where do you want the internet?
Okay.
All of those things will be done. But if you give us an old house with very thick brick walls that are grade listed buildings, then it becomes a very expensive, very complicated, and that will be a lot more money.
That makes sense. Go ahead, Alex.
Just remember that most of your costs are in labor, to actually put the cables in. The cables themselves are not very expensive. And so think about all the things you might want. So you may want to run fiber with, as said before, with the Ethernet, so that gives you a lot of scalability for a long time. And while you're running fiber, like I'm about to rerun a lot of the stuff here, and we're starting to pull stuff out, I'm just running TAC12 to every major room, so I don't have to ever think about this again. So that's kind of my approach to it, along with Ethernet and some BNC. So I want to be able to easily get cameras in and out without having to think about it, without any converter boxes. I want infinite scalability eventually down the road, so I don't have to do it again. And I want to basically have Ethernet to make that work.
And Peter.
So follow on to that comment. I would agree with you, Alex, because when I did my house a few years ago, it's structured cabling. It's actually 2 Ethernet runs, 2 RG6 runs, and a single mode fiber going into each northwest corner and southeast corner of all the major rooms. Now, I'm not doing anything with the fiber right now, and I'm not doing anything with the RG6 anymore, but
you can.
I can, right. But the other point I would make back to Mitch's comment about condos, I rented a condo several years ago when I was up in Ottawa, and found having Ethernet in multiple rooms was useful because I had metal studs in the walls, which would attenuate the Wi-Fi signal.
I see a lot of head nods on the panel. Next question.
Next one comes to us from John Fultz in Sealings Grove, Pennsylvania. And John says, I'm setting up a family feud game with OBS. Animated questions work great using show hide, but they animate only in preview, not program ideas. And he notes, I dislike OBS, but it was the right tool for this.
Go ahead, John Wallace.
Since you dislike OBS, I'm going to recommend there's a PowerPoint template. I'll post it in chat that I've used before. It works pretty well. It's obviously not super fancy, but it definitely gets the job done and good for a family game night.
What's so special about the PowerPoint for it to work with OBS?
This won't be an OBS solution. This will be a PowerPoint that you can then play out, and you can capture the screen if you wanted to. But it allows you to interact and actually, use it like the game show does. So you can reveal the answers slowly, and then it will do the animations behind it as well.
Copy that. Nice. John Preto.
Yeah, this is a little complex. We tried doing this with OBS. We switched over to New Blue Titler because we were able to read directly out of the database where the questions were housed in the database, and the guys could manage the questions easier in the database than they could. I guess you could do a web page in OBS and bring that into OBS, and hopefully you're running on a PC and not a Mac.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Peter Rosado in Las Vegas, Nevada. I saw this during pre-show for Twit. What are the panel's thoughts? And he has a link there to the Chaotica eyeball.
Go ahead, John.
Products like these have been around for a very long time. I always find that they sound very small, very boxy. Small spaces sound small. That's what you really can't beat physics when it comes to creating a large space for your voiceover room, and then allowing some air to move. When you're just boxing that in, you're changing how the diaphragm is going to move with the space around it.
Mitchell?
I don't know about having a giant Nerf foam beach ball in front of my face if I was doing a podcast. It's about this big. So, you're going to look like, what's the band that the DJs that spin with the heads? Anyhow. And if you had that thing in front of you, how are you going to get your script copy so that you can read it around the big ball? If I'm going to spend $200 on a piece of foam, I'll buy a genuine Neumann foam from my U87.
And Bill.
I can't really demo this because I'm on a hypercordiated shotgun type mic, but if you want to know what it's going to sound like with your microphone, just take your hands and literally put them around the microphone, because that's kind of what you're doing. You're enclosing that, and even if it's a semi-porous foam, it's still going to change the nature of your frequency response.
And then just pulling in some of the comments here, Mickey Makachor says reflection filters in general sound bad. So as was just shared by Bill, those are our thoughts there. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael and is up next. He says the Zoom ISO V2 manual mentions some users using Windows 10 programs for production. Considering the flexibility that tools like Loopbacks brings to audio management on Mac OS, wouldn't more complex workflows be easier to implement on Mac OS?
Go ahead, John.
Loopback is great, but there are Windows alternatives that provide very similar solutions for you. Don't be locked into the OS as much as what is the best thing for your workflow. At work, I use a Windows machine. When I'm at home and I'm doing like audio production, I like to be in front of a Mac. It just really comes down to making sure you use the best tool for that job.
Mitchell?
Yeah, if you're looking in the manual, the most important part is the picture of me.
Jason?
The answer is yes. I think that Macs are easier, but one of the differences between a professional and an enthusiast is how flexible can you be? How many different ways can you get the same thing? And in this case, I'm sorry, but Windows is still the vast majority of the world.
Peter?
Yeah, Jason, I agree. I mean, the reality is you need the M1 to get the get Zoom ISO version 2 to get the screens out, but after that, it's really open to whatever receiver you want to have. Could it be a Windows machine? Could it be another Mac? Could it be the same Mac? Could it be a Linux machine? Whatever. How flexible do you want to be?
Go ahead, Bill.
And all of these tools typically use what are called APIs, application programming interfaces, that are built into the operating system of your. Now, in the Mac circumstance, they rewrote this, I think around, I can't remember the date, but they did this thing called core services, where there's a subroutine that runs down very close to the silicon level called core audio. And so every audio system that takes advantage of anything on the Mac calls to core audio. And so that is the same basic code that runs things like Logic, their professional production tool. So when software writers write plugins and things like that, they have access to all that stuff. And it's also why things like Final Cut, its whole audio engine is just a subset of their Logic program, which makes world-class albums and things like that. So it's very clean and it's very good. I would imagine there's a similar architecture on the PC side, where there's something in the program that calls to the deepest levels. So it really doesn't matter very much. I just feel very comfortable working in audio in Final Cut, and I would imagine that PC people feel very comfortable working with those PC APIs that do this. So there's not much difference, I don't think, between the two environments in how, for the end user, they allow you to do what you need to do, and that's the most important thing.
And Alex.
I'll beg to differ on that last comment. so the subsystems in the core audio, the metal enabled systems are so much more efficient on the Mac that it's night and day. At this point in the audio visual world, the PCs are becoming uncompetitive. They're very useful in a lot of other places, in very high end rendering, in a lot of other things that they will be, but they're going to become more and more uncompetitive because they simply can't redo what Apple's doing with the core architecture. When I mean core architecture, the entire architecture of the hardware and its integration with the software. 090 has been largely PC, actually. We have 16 blades that we use for Zoom meetings. By the end of the year, they'll all be Mac Minis. There'll be a handful of Mac Minis that replace all the PCs. The PCs now are just used for looping video. and using SPX/Casper. That's all they're used for anymore because it just doesn't make any sense anymore. And again, before Zoom ISO, before M1s, it didn't make sense for us to have the Macs. So it was, so we had 16 PCs stacked up to do what we needed to do. It was a more cost effective solution for what we needed. But those days are over. And I don't see it ever coming back, mostly because the Windows side is a consortium of people that all have to agree, and Apple doesn't have to argue with anybody. And so their ability to move faster and what we've already seen in performance is stunning. And so I don't think that, I just don't know how they turn the corner.
Next question.
Ike Potter, Hanover, Germany is up next. In After Hours, an upcoming show and tell episode on vintage gear has been mentioned. What will happen in an office hours second hour, in After Hours, or in an After Hours lab? Go ahead, Mitchell.
Ike, I think that's a great question and an idea, and I think it's been mentioned. Josh is the man for scheduling those second hour events. It would make a lot of sense to do it. There's a lot of people with vintage gear. There's a lot of vintage people with newer gear. I think we got it pretty much covered here. What's interesting is that vintage video is, other than just being interesting, is not as valuable as vintage audio. So that should say something. So I'm looking forward to showing off some of my old processing and EQ devices. Go ahead, Alex.
I think that's the second hour. I don't even think it's a lab. I think it's a second hour of us just each panelist bringing one thing. It's like show and tell. You got to bring one thing. You can't bring everything, but all the panelists bring one thing. Josh, when are we doing this? When are we? This would be great. I missed this memo, but I love it. So let's do it.
Next question.
Next one comes from Carl L. Markser in New York City, or New York. Didn't say New York City. Any thoughts on the XMac Studio / Echo 3? Would this work well with DeckLink's SDI cards?
John?
I sure hope so. I bought 3 of them. So they'll be arriving here within the next couple of weeks, be setting it up. I do like the ability to have more than one PCIe Express slot. I like that if it's the Mac Studio versus the Mac Mini, just some additional horsepower. Obviously, it takes up 3 user rack space, which is a lot, but being able to pump out that many SDI signals seems to be something very interesting.
Go ahead, Alex.
Just remember that currently there's some limits to the amount of bandwidth that any one node on if you're using this for a Zoom ISO, that any one node on that network, there's a limit right now, and there will be continually a limit even when you go to that, where you can't necessarily get more than a certain number. I think it's going to be, so the reason we got just the SE1, not the SEL, we keep on saying that because everyone seems to have done the same thing, bought the SEL, then realized it was too small. And so the SE1 has the one, and that's why we were using one there. But if you want to add other features, and there may be some point in the future where you would get full utilization of 2 cards. I think right now you might be able to, when the upgrades happen in the future, you should be able to get 12 outputs from an M1 base M1A. But right now, I think it's 8, or at full resolution, actually a little less than that right now. But I think that we should see a lot more in the future.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is up next with Liberty. Has a question for you. How would you build and then promote a woman's home improvement site and he notes bjane.com? How would you produce the videos showing how-to tips? And he notes here at the end, be ruthless.
Oh, be ruthless. Okay, so doing a quick scan and review. Well, starting off with anytime promoting anything women's related is definitely looking out in the community and seeing what other parallel organizations that we can introduce the community to. And then when you're looking at video, always starting with that about us story and why it matters and why we're here and something. Let's quickly look back here. And the fact that they're a home improvement, like anytime that you see, like when I'm searching online and, the thumbnail is everything. So when you go on YouTube and you're searching, then it's like, oh, you read through the titles, but you're also looking at like who looks credible. And so I would have some of these women start doing some home improvement tip videos and looking at the top types of videos, we had Sean and Benji on SEO, search engine optimization is everything. So I put in some keywords into YouTube, see what videos are those keywords that people are using, and then go and create content that can answer some of those questions, answer them differently. And again, the thumbnail is everything, because as a woman, if I've got to fix something at home, and I go to YouTube to figure out how to, change this tap or change this filter, I'd more likely click on something that is someone like representative and someone's like, oh, she looks like me, or that's a mom, and something funky like that. So just some quick ideas there of how they can do that. Hopefully that's helpful. I'm sure you'll let me know in a DM. Next question.
Dave Burke in Alexandria, Virginia is in next. He says, is C-Stand a brand name with some reliable level of quality, or is it generic? If generic, can you recommend the sturdiest brands of C-Stand?
Alex?
It is generic. It stands for Sentry Stand. Sentry was the company that first made these. So the Sentry Stand is the first one. There's a lot of different kinds. There's a baby stand, which is 20 inches. There's the standard C stand is typically 40 inches. If one of the legs will go up, and separate, it's a Rocky Mountain stand, so that you can put it on things like stairs. And then you have whether you want folding. I think Matthews was the first one to make a folding C stand. You have turtle stands or turtle bases, which are removable from the bar. Which, wow, does that make a difference? So those are a couple of the different ones that you may look at. I think that I will say that I tend to lean towards Avengers and Matthews as the two brands that I'm going to buy for work. For home, I have to admit I get newer, because they're really inexpensive and they're pretty sturdy. The funny thing is they're all metal. The newer ones, the fit and finish, how they fit together, how they work is just a little less. It's just like they just took a little out of it. For my home stuff, it's fine. I would never put them into a studio.
Mitchell?
Yeah, what Alex just said. I've got one right behind me. You can sort of see it here. It's a Matthews, all in black. And I even have a black sandbag for it. And make sure you buy some C46s to go with it.
Bill.
C46s?
C47.
It's a little smaller than the 47.
Oh, there you go. Anyway, I think the one thing you need if you're going to get your first C-stand, get a grip arm with it. That is a grip head and arm that really increases the utility of any C-stand by orders of magnitude. It allows you to position something other than just on top of a straight stand. The other thing I would talk about is what they're made out of and how heavy they are, how portable they are. The traditional C-stands, the good ones, are very heavy. So you get 3 or 4 of them and you decide you're going to take them on location. It becomes a bit of a task to figure out how you're going to transport those. They do make lighter weight ones, but remember the game with the C-stand is almost always that you want to fly some piece of equipment. Now, if it's just going on top, it's not a problem. But if it's on the end of the grip arm, then you're going to have to counterbalance it. So you need some weights or some form of something to counterbalance. It gets into a systemic thing. And the heavier a C-stand is, I mean, you can make the same form in aluminum, but it just wouldn't have the stability that a good, solid, professional C-stand has. And stability can be very important. Particularly, I have a very large rig that I use because I'm almost always flying a backlight over my talent. And so I use what's called a menace arm on top of a C-stand to take a really long run out so that the stand isn't in the shot, but I still get the right position for the backlight. This whole ecosystem has a bunch of things like this and the rules for what side you put the load on so that it tightens rather than loosens. Study C-stands. If you're just getting into them, study them a little bit. There's a lot more to it than you might expect just coming to buy it and use it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Bill brings up a really good point. There's so many different things you can add to a C-stand other than the aforementioned sandbags and C47 clothesline clip. But little grip head, this is made by Impact. This can go on it. There are knuckles of different sizes and shapes that you can fly on a C-stand. It's probably the most ubiquitous piece of equipment that sits in any studio. There usually is a wall full of them, because you can do it from everything from mounting a camera to a light fixture to a boom pole. They come in handy for all shapes and sizes.
And Alex.
And just remember, if you need them for one job, they're durable goods, and so they are very inexpensive to rent lots of them. So you can do that. I do like the removable bases, the C-Stand Pluses, because they're much easier to pack. Into things. You can pack them all together and pull them apart. It works nicely.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas is up next. And Paul says, my 5th generation iPad with software version 15.4.1 has a huge number of videos and photos. How do I safely delete all of these without affecting my photos and videos on Apple's cloud? If possible, please illustrate the answer on an actual iPad.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that with an actual iPad in front of everybody. But the answer is it depends. First things first, you need to be sure that everything that is actually on, that appears to be on the iPad, is actually on the iPad. And that is not as easy as you might think. If it's set, for example, to optimize storage and you forgot about it a long time ago, there's a great chance that things are just going to get wonky when you try this. But the software that you need is from iMazing, IMAZING. This will allow you an insane amount of flexibility for what you are doing with your things. After you have a full backup using iMazing, not using Apple, then you just log out of iCloud and then murder as you see fit. That's it.
Next question.
Mitchell Hill, Wilmington, Delaware, up next here on the panel. And Mitch says, I'm still captivated by the BBC music video featuring Brian Wilson's song, God Only Knows. Done back in 2014, this is a great example of a music video done right, and he's got a link there to it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, we were talking about the Beach Boys, and immediately I had a flashback to it. It's one of the few covers of a song that was so well produced, it really brought tears to my eyes. If you get a chance, and we posted the link to it in the event chat here so you can see it. It's so well produced. It's a collaboration of the BBC and a lot of singers, just a bunch of people singing with their love for Brian Wilson. And it's done in a very stylized way, which is certainly worth taking apart someday on office hours and talking about how did they get that shot. It's very, very well done.
I was going to ask you, I was like, when you said produce, was that the audio quality, the video quality, all of the above? I'm looking at it here. Oh, and there's Pharrell in there. Like you said, there's a bunch of different people.
Everybody you know is in there. It's the audio quality, as we well know, but the way they produced it, the way they mixed it, everything about it is flawless.
Alex?
Yeah, I have to admit that I didn't. It looks like it was mostly green screen, just looking at the keys. But it is. It's just a really, really, really fun to watch. I didn't even know it existed. So anyway, I think it's. And I would go back to Pet Sounds because it's pretty interesting. Interesting album. If you're young enough that you don't know what that is, you should go. It's amazing watching interviews of artists and just go, well, I heard Pet Sounds, and then I realized, like the Beatles heard Pet Sounds, I think somewhere I read, and then they realized they had to do something completely different. Like whatever they were doing was insufficient. That's the Beatles, So it is. And I was listening to it about a week ago, just to kind of refresh all the songs that are on it. It's pretty amazing. It's just an amazing collection of music.
And to our producers, this is a great time for you to go ahead and add any more questions that you have for our panel as we get ready soon, about a half an hour away from our esports conversation. Next question.
Next question, Guy Cochran in Seattle. Oh, he's challenging us. What are you thinking would be cool to bring to Vintage Day in office hours?
John?
Man, I got a garage full of old vintage stuff, but I think I'll bring my friend Mitch because he's kind of vintage.
Mitch will already be here. So what else will you be bringing?
I have the very first AT&T video from like the 60s, which is pretty cool.
Wow. Okay, Jason.
I had to check it on the rack right behind me. I would say my Alesis 3036.
Okay. What's an Alesis 3036?
It's a stereo compressor. I'm sorry. I think it's the 3630 now that I'm thinking about it, but it's a very standard compressor that basically gives you all the knobs instead of, just kind of, oh, well, we skipped over this because, it's a compressor and a gate and a limiter, and it's just a great piece of gear.
Okay. Alex?
I'm torn. I'm torn between the F950, the Ozo, or a Zonophone. I have a Zonophone here. So anyway, I think a Zonophone might win because I think it might win for oldest AV gear.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
As I said, vintage people presenting new equipment normally, and then the other way around. I would bring my old, there it is, my old U87. It's the first piece of expensive audio gear I ever bought in 1978, and it still sounds great.
Are we also demoing, like not just showing it, but actually demonstrating how
Why not?
these
Let's
vintage?
do it.
Okay,
Let's show it off.
Putting it out there. Nigel? Oh,
I'm very depressed because I have nothing. We've downsized a couple of times, and when you downsize, you eradicate all those things from your life that you cannot fit in the cupboard of a 1,500 square foot apartment.
You obviously don't have a large garage.
No, no garage at all. And so it's depressing. And now I could just think of all the things I could have shown you that I no longer own.
Well, name one of them. We'll
I had
imagine.
reel-to-reel tape recorders. I had cart machines. I had all sorts of great stuff from my days. But going down to 1,500 square feet, there's no room for anything.
Understood. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this. I will take it down. It hasn't been moved for a long time, but behind me over my right shoulder, you will see something that is blinking up there. That is a wire recorder from about 1924, 1925 that I believe is still functioning. It's really interesting to listen to it because they actually used to, before tape recorders were invented, they used to record things on magnetic wire. And I bought that at a yard sale a long time ago and was shocked to find out that it still works. We will keep my fingers crossed that it will still work for Vintage Audio Day.
And I'd probably not be able to bring it into this room, but I have got my dad's old record player. It's probably from the 70s. Don't make faces, panelists, but that would be as vintage as I have here. But it would be, and they actually, it was actually upgraded or tweaked a couple years ago so that it'll work. Because I just remember my parents playing Nat King Cole and like all of that stuff around Christmas time, all the classics on record. So that would be my my vintage contribution. Peter?
Yeah, somewhere down in my garage, I have two things, but they're very computerish. One is a plane of ferrite core memory, which is, XY line, read lines and little magnetic donuts. And then I also have mercury delay line memory, which is very carefully packed because there is mercury in the tube still.
And Mitchell?
Yeah, I just remembered I still have a digital playback device that my great-great-grandfather gave me, not directly, but indirectly. It's an old music box with the little tongs on it, and then the roller that goes inside with all the little points on it that play different music, and it plays bells and sounds. And the reason it's digital is those are all digital playback tongs that engage the little musical notes. So technically it's digital, but very old.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. And Paul says, Meta rolled out the Quest Pro headset last week. It has 5 inward-facing cameras that totally tracks your eye movements and facial expressions, and 5 cameras to track your movements in the real world. Thoughts?
Go ahead, John.
I watched the event last Tuesday, and this is a step in the evolution of goggles. The neat thing about this one, I think it has 13 or 14 cameras on it. Is that it does both AR and VR both, and so that's exciting about that headset. And they beat Apple to the punch, because Apple, hopefully we see it the first quarter of next year. That one will also have 12, 15 cameras on it as well. So it's finally coming to fruition after how long we've been waiting, Alex? 10 years for these things?
Alex?
Yeah, my first goggles that I put on were 1999. And I could model by going, I want a sphere this big. I tapped this thing and then went like this with my hands. And there were these gloves on, and we still haven't gotten back to that yet. That was it. I think it was probably 1997, and it was by a company called Silicon Graphics. Had this VR R&D that they were doing, and so this has been around for a while, and a lot of us have seen the future and haven't been able to experience it. I think we see them slowly closing that gap. I think this is still going to be a step in the right direction. It's probably not going to be the thing yet, but I think that I wouldn't expect it to make a huge impact on most people's lives. It's a pretty expensive piece of hardware, but I'm glad that they're making more expensive pieces of hardware, like the HoloLens, that allows us to really figure out what to do with this rather than trying to figure out how to make it inexpensive. So I think that this is definitely the right direction. I do think that there's a lot of things in our industry. So one of the things we've already used headsets for, and mostly we were using the Samsung Gear a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago, was to take it to clients and say, this is what your event's going to look like. Like you can walk in, and we would build the whole event, and then they could, in Unity at the time, and you could just put it on and just look around and see, and then they could say, oh, the stage is a little too big, or it's too far over here, things that you really couldn't see when you look at renders. And so I think that those are the kinds of things, those industrial solutions are the kind of things we may see more in the future.
Peter?
I think a couple of key things to remember is the cameras on the inside are so you actually it can figure out where you're trying to look in the virtual reality. But the nice thing about the cameras in the outside is hopefully you can use it so you won't run into things when you're walking around in the room. Because I don't know about you guys, but I don't have a 12 by 12 space at my family room to clear out of everything in order to play a virtual reality game and walk around.
And Bill?
All I know for sure is that if this thing has 5 cameras pointed at my face, the first plugin I want to get for it is something called Wrinkle Remover Pro.
Alex?
Peter, I just want to say that it's not that you don't have the space, it's that you're not willing to provide the space. It's all about priority.
Does anybody know did they put a price tag on that yet? I saw it.
I think it's 1,500.
17
or 1,700 or
Okay.
1,500, yeah.
Okay, neat. Next question.
Jack Cannon, it looks like, in Phoenix, Arizona. Hi, Jack. Says, for capturing video and audio outside, where the goal is to just record the environment, what microphone would you recommend to hear all of the crickets, rain, and so forth?
Let's start with Mitchell.
I would use the exact same microphone that's right in front of Bill right there, that 416 Sennheiser. I think that would be with a pistol grip with a built-in shock mount, because obviously you can't hold it in your hand and not make a lot of noise, so you want to have it be isolated. And if not that, probably any Schoeps boom-type style microphone, very, very high output, very, very crisp, very good for collecting environmental stuff.
John?
I would use the Neumann KU100. It's in the shape of a human head. It provides, I know audio, it's very fun to use. I've used it in a couple spaces. Definitely fun for capturing outside, getting the full picture.
Go ahead, Jason.
Boy, these are great answers. I'm not sure if I can beat either one of them. My generic answer would be any Neumann condenser will absolutely capture everything. And a really good parabolic. There was an early second hour, the guy that came in with the, I think Alex bought a few of them, who redesigned the parabolic dish. Did an incredible job, and you get one of those and you can put pretty much anything there and get pretty good sound.
Alex?
Yeah, Clover. Clover is and that one is actually a lav, so a lavalier inside of a directional parabolic mirror, or a built. So what basically it focuses everything onto that lavalier, and so anyway, that's what they use for a lot of football and stuff like that. So you can get a lot of those. Another thing to think about are like Schoeps makes some pretty interesting surround versions of that. You can also get a less expensive version than the Schoeps from Sennheiser called an Ambio. So if you're trying to get things that are all the way around, and it's something that I'm hoping a little later this fall to play with a little bit more, is capturing that surround experience that's there. 416 though, I think is a really solid mic to just be capturing specific things that you're looking at. It's pretty common, and get it with something like a dead cat, so to make sure that if you got wind and so on and so forth, you're not going to hear it. A dead cat, of course, for those listening, is not really a dead cat. That would not improve
animals
the audio.
were harmed in the making the dead cat.
That's what we tend to call it, a blimp, or dead cat is what goes over the blimp. The blimp has no fur. The dead cat does.
It's a fluffy.
A fluffy, yeah. There you go.
And this is a popular question in the comments here, just pulling in. So Mickey McAture says, an MS or surround mic. I use the Sanken, hopefully I said that correctly, CMS 7.6, the Pearl MS 8CL, and the DPA 5100. And also Chris Widener had mentioned the Rode NTG4 shotgun or Zoom H3 VR. And I heard someone sound like they were going to comment on that.
I was going to say is that when I looked at Mickey's, I was just reminded of, if you just want totally crazy things, the Sanken CO 100K, instead of going up to 20,000 hertz, it goes up to 100,000. And sound designers sometimes use those to grab sounds that you can't hear. So if you then shift them down, you can go find things in the world around you I don't own it. It's on my bucket list. It's on my Christmas list. I keep on saying, hey, for Christmas, I'd really like to get a Sanken CO 100K. And my wife is like, no. So anyway, we could, so we could buy a small car for that. So anyway.
Right. So that was definitely a buy once, cry for a long time. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. But with so many great sounds. So
priorities. Yes. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. He says Apple and Mercedes-Benz are introducing Dolby Atmos music playback on the S-Class and Maybach models, along with the EQS and EQE electric models. Do you think spatial audio in the car creates a higher risk of driver distraction?
Jason?
Absolutely not, unless you're watching jump scare movies while driving. Other than that, no, I think you're fine.
Mitchell?
It's nice to improve the listening experience. Cars have traditionally been a great environment for that. But yes, it would be distracting unless it was a self-driving car. Then you got nothing else to do, so you might as well enjoy the experience.
Alex?
I've had the opportunity to listen to some of Atmos in a car, and I don't think it would have any distraction at all for you, except for the fact that you want to drive everywhere, because your car turns out to be a great place to put Atmos, because you can put the speakers very close and you can get them all tuned into one side or the other. The hard part is, do you share the Atmos with the other people in the car, because you can tune it to the right seat, right? So that's the only little gotcha there. But it is a great place to listen to music because it's so controlled. Every time you close it, it's the same. It's soft, typically on the inside, and so the audio is pretty good. And on that S class, it's going to knock most of the sound out from what's around you. So it would actually be potentially, from the experiences that I've had so far, my preferred place to listen to Atmos.
And Peter.
My only comment was it potentially is distracting, not so much the music and listening to the music, but whether or not you're going to reach over and try and adjust it while you're driving.
That makes sense. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Dan Huber in Erie, Pennsylvania. And Dan says, how about revisiting the $5,000 studio?
Jason?
I love this idea. I think we should do this, I don't know, at least twice a year. It seems like at this current rate of things getting neater and less expensive and more bespoke and specific for a home studio, this is a dead giveaway, simple thing that we should be doing regularly.
And Bill?
Yeah, I think it would be fascinating to talk about. For me, it's always starting with the question, though, what are you trying to do with it? Because there are studios for purposes that I could easily get done inside of that number, and there are studios for other purposes that no way. So as long as we understand that if you're doing two-person interviews primarily, you're designing a studio differently than if you're shooting green screen, then yeah, that'd be fun to talk about.
And then just kind of, I guess, brainstorming off of that, it would be, to your point, Bill, of like, what are you trying to accomplish? Maybe a $5,000 studio for educators or, for different groups. And then that way, even if we do, and I agree with you, Jason, like minimum 2 times a year, because there's just so much that changes. But even if we narrow it down a little bit more, that could even be interesting to help, our community just from a industry perspective. Mitchell?
Yeah, it's interesting what's going on, too, is that the manufacturers like Sony, for example, is now concentrating on a completely different category of webcams. So, I have an FX3 with a lens on it. It might have cost $5,000 or $6,000 alone, but they now have an FX30, which is a pretty much the same camera with a few less features for like $1,000. So you can get into some pretty nice stuff now for a $5,000 budget. I think it's a changing target as more and more manufacturers get involved.
Nigel?
Yeah, I think Mr. Predo keeps a pretty good list of where we were last time in terms of the $5,000. I guess the problem is going to be is if you think the ISO ATEM and a deck link card is now essential, you're not going to be able to fit that within the 5,000. So maybe we need the 5,000 and the 10,000 that allows you to do the deck link.
And Alex?
I think there's probably, I kind of feel like we could concentrate this into a week, maybe even later this month as we're going through this transition where we go like 5, 15, 30, 100, and just kind of go up the scale just to talk about what those are. Or we could do them once a week to give people time to think about them. But I do think about thinking about those things because a lot of us work at different scales. And so we want to figure out what that actually looks like. I do think that the market has changed dramatically since the last one we did. When you look at whether it's the FX30 that Mitchell was talking about, but also the Insta360 has changed how I do remotes. Already, where a lot of us are using different mics than we used before, different recorders, different things. Also, we want to think about whether it's a studio for you nowadays or whether you're building a studio. Like one of the things that I'm doing is building a studio to run events. So I'm not there to be in the event. I'm there to run the event. And inside of $5,000, that's the ATEM SDI with the Mac Mini and the and a couple extra things there. And that fits well within that budget. So it's a matter of whether you're an observer as well or a participant.
And Jason?
And just so we're clear on the constraints here, is this $5,000 including all the computers? Or is it $5,000? Yes. Okay, total. Okay, got it.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana says, what is your go-to for mapping two projectors to overlap the projected images?
Go ahead, John.
I use ProPresenter. It has a built-in output that allows you to overlay the images and shows you how much of the projector should overlap on each other and adjust the brightness for that overlapping area. It's been very successful for me. There's a free trial. It allows you to leverage it without even purchasing the license. So it's definitely something I've used in the past.
And Bill.
And don't forget hardware in this case, because since the days of slide projectors, multi-image slide projectors, there are physical devices that allow you to tune up the registration of two things in precise increments. They normally have twist knobs and just move it literally fractions of a degree over. So if you're trying to get fine tuning, sometimes it's easy to do it electronically, but sometimes it's easier to do it physically.
And Alex.
Yeah, at the finest registration, it's almost impossible to do physically, but you can do it electronically because you have to. The amount of movement is sub-pixel, and you'll see two grids up there that they're working with. Typically that, and then also the projectors themselves have their own mechanics in them. So it's not like you're moving those around, but you're actually changing the lens. So the lens will sit there and pull that together. I haven't seen whether Resolume does that or not, but a lot of mapped systems are using Resolume Arena, so it's another thing to look at.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas says MetaQuest Pro, which we discussed, is also partnering with Zoom to create virtual spaces for businesses and Zoom meetings. How do you visualize this unfolding?
Alex?
I think you have to keep your eye on it. I think that it makes sense for Zoom to not ignore what's there. I think that what the solutions that we're going to see right now are probably not going to be that compelling. And I still have concerns as someone who's done a lot of VR work. I still have concerns with spending lots of time with a headset on, hours at a time with a headset on, and what that does to the health of the eye. So I just think we're still early days, and I think we want to watch what these do to people's eyes over time. So I think that's my concern about using it for meetings. It's one thing to use it for a short period of time to visualize something. When we start talking about putting it on for 2, 3, 4 hours for something, I definitely have concerns that it may not be good for people's optical systems. So,
next question.
Bobby Rafferty in Central Florida is up next, and Bobby says, anyone going to be virtually attending Adobe Max 2022 Creativity Conference in Los Angeles?
Alex?
Oftentimes Adobe pulls out all the stops, and what's really interesting is that they bring in a lot of pretty heavy hitters to watch it. I will admit that I only see little bits and pieces of it. It's one of those things that I kind of I watch for a couple minutes, and I've never been held longer than usually the only part that I end up watching are the new features in Photoshop because they're usually their vision of Photoshop. So they'll show things that they haven't released into Photoshop, and we've seen a lot of things like the smart removals and everything else happen a year or two sometimes before that. Then you also see things where they go, and then we could morph people's faces, like using they used a little bit of their AI, and everyone freaked out because it was one thing for a small company to do that. It's another thing for Adobe to put it into all their products. And so I think that it's interesting to see that their vision. So I pay attention to their product announcements and their vision sessions. The rest of it, I've never watched more than a couple minutes.
I, in particular, whenever Adobe Max comes around, I follow them on Facebook, and they do a lot of great live sessions there. So more so than watching and participating virtually on their site and those activities, I pay attention to what the community is saying and doing on Facebook. And then especially my community of creatives, I have a couple of friends that are connected with them from a brand perspective and using some of their apps and tools. So that's what I'll be paying attention to, because typically they have the pulse on what we need to be paying attention to moving forward. So indirectly, I'll be participating. It is happening this week. So looking forward to the commentary in Discord. Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, up again with how much would it cost to build a studio in a 40-foot cargo container? How long would it take, and what skills would be needed?
We'll start with you, Nigel.
So I'd never built a studio in a container, but I built a data center in one. I can tell you can put a multi-million-dollar data center into a cargo box. There are 3 constraints I remember. that we really cared about. One is you've got to really protect the stuff in there, because as you take these containers on and off lorries, they're not necessarily very gentle. So if you put very delicate equipment in there, it's going to get bashed around. The next hardest problem is getting power and cooling into those places, because they really, depending where they are, can really heat up or really cool down. And if your equipment is very sensitive, you should be careful of that. I think the third issue, which is interesting for all of us, that when we were building them, you could buy a container for about $2,000. Last time I checked a couple of weeks ago, they were about $16,000. So they've now become a big cost.
John?
Yeah, depending on where you are, I know around our area, you can actually find shipping containers that nobody has anything to do with them. We actually took a bunch of them into a warehouse space we renovated and turned them into conference rooms. Pretty much a similar process that you would do to turn them into a home or turn them into a studio. You're just going to put a floor in, make sure it's well isolated, put your HVAC system into place, make sure that's separate from anything else that you're doing within the space, and you should have a really functional room in a short period of time.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yes, I've actually spec'd this before. For those of you with your Google Foo, if you look at Tin Can Albuquerque or Tin Can Alley in Albuquerque, this is a client of mine, and it was a lot of fun to spec. Basically, the answer is what it costs to normally do a studio if it's not going to move, plus acoustic sound treatments. And yeah, that's the long and the short of it. The neat part, I will start with the neat part. You can use magnets. You can mount, like, you automatically have a grid. So you can just magnetically stick anything you want anywhere. And that simplifies it quite a bit. Also, you really have to just acoustically treat the heck out of it, because they really are echo chambers.
And Bill?
I was going to do Jason's last point. I mean, you've got all the walls are parallel fixed. It's going to be an absolute resonant chamber. So trying to get that to sound good, unless you want to work 100% of the time in headphones, which is, some people like to do that. I don't. It just drives me nuts over the course of hours. So whatever.
And Alex?
I was trying to find the organization that has done this, and I've worked with them. I'm a little embarrassed that I can't find it so quickly. I think it was Spaces or something off that. But basically, they built remote little stages, and I've actually visited a couple of them in all parts of the world. So Iraq and Afghanistan and Mexico City, and they put these all over. And what they did is, again, what all of us have been kind of talking about. You got to manage the cooling. You have to manage reflection. They have to, manage, connectivity and so on and so forth into them. But it turns out that 8 feet wide is actually a pretty good number for that. One thing that's interesting is that you didn't really need the 40 foot. The 40 foot is harder to deal with. The 20 foot seems to be a good distance, to do most of the things that you want to do. And it actually is a pretty solid way to do it. It's also the reason, of course, they did it there is because it's pretty secure. So when you close it up, you can lock it, and it's a little harder to break into than other things as if you use, the proper tools. Although it feels like you don't know what lock would actually work these days, because people have gotten pretty good at those. But those have been fairly useful, and I've thought about it a lot as far as being able to drop a studio for an event and just have it come down for individuals. So the thing you'll find is that a studio where you want to have people on a round table, it's not wide enough, and it's not wide enough to get an angle from any direction really for it. But as a single person standing or sitting, talking to people in front of them, it's a pretty compelling solution. And so we've talked about it a lot, of being able to drop multiple. We have used them in their remote locations to tie them into events in the past. They've been used by the UN, World Economic Forum, the Obama Foundation. Those are things kind of trying to pull people together and have them understand what it's like to be somewhere off in the distance. But the thing that we've used it for specifically has been, to build. We've tested these. We think that the 20 by 10 or the 20 by 8 or whatever it is the one that we would probably use the most to kind of, you could drop 4 or 5 of them at an event. And that's where all your remote participants come from. It's just walk into the stage, and we don't have to build anything.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, back again. Jason, what was the software called? Amazing, and what was the best full backup option for the iPad?
Jason?
Yeah, it's pronounced iMazing, IMAZING, and you can get the app at imazing.com. And there are not many full best options for the iPad. There's one way to back it up, and just wind back to my answer, and you'll see it. I don't want to repeat myself.
Next question.
Robin Cutshaw in Atlanta, Georgia. Up next, he says, Dante has been a nightmare to configure. I'm using a Mac Studio with trunked VLANs over the 10 gig Ethernet. Dante does not support the VLAN interfaces. They also claim not to support USB Ethernet. How do folks use Dante on a Mac? Dante alternative? Is there one?
Go ahead, Jason.
I don't know of a Dante alternative that is nearly as flexible. Yes, there are a few, but I don't want to get into that. Do not use your built-in NIC. I don't care if it's 10G or 100G. It does not work on the Mac Mini. And yes, it does work with USB. I believe that's how just about everybody uses them. I'll pass to Alex.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely works with USB Ethernet. So we use it all the time for USB Ethernet.
Next question.
John, looks like Fenhouse, and this is a two-parter, he says, out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Part one, does anyone know where to download previous versions of NDI tools? And part two, upgraded to 5.5.1.0, and it causes serious chop that didn't exist in 5.4. Has anyone else experienced this?
I am looking to see because I know that Guy has been watching. I've seen Guy comment in the chat, and I'm thinking that Guy's like our resident NDI expert and may be able to better answer this. So John, if you want to either post this question in Discord, if you're already a part of the Office Hours community there, and or post it again in the chat, and we'll see if Guy will have an answer for you. If not, we'll just bring it back for another day when Guy is on the panel. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Up next, Hollyland 300 Pro seems to not list the frequency on 5 gig very understandably. Does anyone know what channels these equate to on a wireless app?
Alex?
I don't know, but I will say that we've definitely had recently or in the last couple months experimented with the Hollylands, and I'd just be careful with them. I mean, they are a less expensive solution, but the mileage will vary, and sometimes not vary in your advantage. So you want to kind of think through that a little bit.
Jason?
So Wi-Fi or the Wi-Fi band is wireless fidelity, and it is this entire kind of unregulated set of frequencies that companies can use at their proprietary will. So no, they're not going to publish it. And short of a frequency scanner, I don't think you're really even going to be able to figure out the logic of the way that it's hopping and skipping between frequencies in that general area.
And John?
It's using the 20 megahertz band within the 5 gigahertz space. So you could, if you're having issues with other access points stepping on that, you could see if they support the 40 megahertz. You could change that over and then leave that 20 megahertz band free if you're trying to kind of fight any sort of interference.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're wrapping up our first hour here. So thank you again go ahead, Alice.
there we go. So we have it there. I just wanted to, I was going to fill for 2. I was going to fill.
Always
I was
in the
getting ready to
clutch.
fill for 2 minutes. I was prepping. I was like, we got to fill for 2 more minutes. I didn't want another question, but we weren't anyway. It's good.
Right. Here we go. So again, producers, thank you so much for your questions during the first hour. And as we make this transition into our conversation around esports and the business of esports, I'm so happy to have Todd Harris join us today with Skillshot and so many more. Todd, I will let you expand because you have been in this space for a very long time. So we're happy to have you here today.
Thanks, Liberty. It's great to be here. What a great looking group. I mean, I know you guys have been doing this show now for many days and months, but this is the most impressive Zoom panel because everyone's so clean and centered. I feel like I need to take a snapshot of this. It's like setting the gold standard out there.
Right. During our tech check, that's why I said it's like, this is not your regular Zoom meeting. And now you see it in action. But Todd, I do want to get into, like, there's a lot happening in esports, and specifically even with the League of Legends coming up. But before we get there and really break that down, if you can kind of walk us through how you got into this space.
Sure. Happy to. So I would describe myself, I guess, as a tech entrepreneur / operator background, originally in computer science, and then worked quite a bit in what they call the fintech industry now, making point of sales and then software as a service, and was fortunate to have some of those businesses do well and be part of starting a video game company here in Georgia, talking to you from Atlanta, Georgia. So the company High Res Studios, we started in 2005, started very modestly with 4 of us, but that's about a 450 person company. About 120 million people have played a video game from that company. And to be successful in gaming, you need a good game, but you also need to figure out how the audience is going to discover that game and stay engaged, because it's very competitive. And we leaned very hard into esports to market our game originally. So it was supporting competitions to drive more players to play the games that we were making. It was a very strong correlation between those that watched esports and how much time they spent in the game, which also tends to translate into how much money they're spending in the game. So we found...
And sorry, Todd, before we get too far off, can you define esports for us?
Sure. So esports is the organized competitive play of video games, often in front of spectators, but not always. So that is esports. So if you think of the game publisher who's in the business of developing a gaming product and taking that to market and making money through the video game themselves, either selling a $60 game, or more and more common is microtransactions, where the game itself might be free, but inside the game, you can monetize with virtual items. So that's how a game publisher makes money. There are companies in the esports industry that make money by putting production elements around the video game. So my current company, Skillshot, you could kind of think of as the ESPN of video games, in that we are organizing competitions, we are putting out a live stream production product, and also doing live events. And there's other entities in the esports industry, like Ghost Gaming, which is more like the Atlanta Hawks or the Atlanta Braves of video games, where it's actually a professional team. So very big picture, esports industry, you have game publishers that make the game, you have event organizers that put on competitions, and then you have teams or players that participate in them. And back to the origin, Liberty, we started as a game publisher. And so we were doing esports really for the benefit of the parent company making the game. But we saw an opportunity to split out that business and have it do not just games from the parent company, but games for all of the major publishers out there. And that's really what caused myself and some partners to spin out the company Skillshot from the parent company, High Res, and do it here in Atlanta, where there's a lot of esports activity here to come.
Yeah, and then just even, it was a couple years ago, I believe, that even, as you say, there's a lot happening in Georgia esports-wise, really across the U.S., but Georgia has some big wins with the being the first high school, having the first official high school team. Am I saying that correctly, like official esports team?
So as you mentioned, globally and nationally, really in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of growth, and then a lot of it's happened here in Atlanta. Just to give everyone a sense of the industry size, gaming, meaning hardware like the Xbox, the PlayStation, games themselves, and microtransactions. So the gaming industry is about $180 billion globally. And you have to take the entire film industry and the entire music industry and put them together, and gaming is larger. So it's much bigger in terms of revenue than many people realize. And then here in Atlanta, for a lot of reasons, including that it's just been identified as a priority industry by the public sector. And there were multiple strong private companies here, my companies I was involved with and others, where it's really become a bit of an epicenter. And so, as you said, Liberty, this goes from having game publishers here in town, High Res Studios, another company called Blue Mammoth that was acquired by Ubisoft, another company called Tripwire was also recently acquired, to having 5 different professional team franchises located here, not just Ghost that I'm associated with, but others. And then really moving into this amateur level, that's where a lot of the recent activity is. So there's about 25 states in the US now where, believe it or not, you can earn a varsity jacket at your high school playing a video game. Georgia, as you said, Liberty, was one of the first 5 to have the state high school association sanction video games. You can then earn a college scholarship. Nationally, there's about 200 universities and $16 million allocated to helping young people go to college, just like a traditional sports scholarship. And we also have many of those schools here in our backyard in Georgia. So starting to build not just the top of the pyramid where you have the LeBron Jameses of esports and certain video games, but really kind of moving down to the amateur level.
And what do you think has been, just putting the spotlight again on just what's been happening over the last 5 years nationally, but then also what's happening in Georgia and some other states? What do you think has attributed to the success and the growth in the market of esports?
Well, I think the big picture trends from when I grew up playing video games, which was in the home or maybe at the local arcade. So there was still the appetite to compete, to socialize, and to gather. But what's happened more recently, really this interview is a symbol of it. It's just the connectivity online. So games became more and more multiplayer format versus a single player story-driven narrative format. Those games still exist, but most of the revenue today are multiplayer games where you're playing cooperatively and competitively. You're not just trying to solve a puzzle or get to the end of the story. And that happened because the internet, more and more people got access to broadband connectivity. So you and I, Liberty, can play from our homes. We don't have to be on the couch together in front of a console. So we can play together. That's number one. But then really Twitch TV, which is the platform where most people, about 70% of the audience, watches other people play live. That platform and the connectivity behind it also really expanded. So now we're not just playing online, people can watch online. So those two things allowed the industry to scale very quickly. There's really no friction now for me as a player, no matter where I grow up. If I have a computing device, and these days that could even be my phone and the internet, there's nothing stopping me from being one of the best players in the world. And if you compare that to something like traditional sports, there's always access challenges. You're not going to grow up to be a hockey player if you don't have an ice rink near you. And geographic resources, that's always a consideration. But 3 billion people on planet Earth now have the internet and at least a phone. And soon it's going to be the other 3.5 billion. So everyone has access to the field of play, like a virtual basketball court or soccer field they always have. And then also everyone all over the world, if they have internet, can watch that competition. So these two factors together is what's really caused both the gaming industry and the esports industry to grow so quickly. No friction and aspirational nature, where any young person feels like if they put in the time and they have the skill, they could ascend without there being any kind of barriers between them and their passion.
And you alluded to the fact that we have so there's no friction, and by creating these tournaments, let's say, and they're in-person events, but there's some level of virtual production that comes in play as well for those people in our audience who are in the production space. What are some things, like if they wanted to get into esports from that side, like the event space, what are some of the key aspects that make a quality tournament?
Yeah. So again, when COVID hit and everything else stopped, sports stopped, music stopped, esports continued because the field of play itself can be virtual. Now, for multiple reasons, when big money is involved or big stakes, you tend to want to bring people in person. But for regular season games and during COVID, when that was impossible, you still had multi-million-dollar tournaments happen, and they were played online by the competitors from their house. And you had virtual production also happen, from the houses of the virtual production team. And so when you're looking at one of those events, there are multiple teams involved. There is a full production team that's probably the most equivalent to the roles that many people watching or listening today are familiar with, where you have graphics operators, you have technical directors, you have producers, you have most of the roles that you would find in live sports or live news. The one additional role on the production side that's very important is you have the role of an in-game observer. So imagine this being equivalent to your camera people on the football field catching the play, but they're literally inside the video game itself, controlling a camera. And those tools are specific to each game, and the subject matter expertise is specific to each game. So in a 3D, fast-paced shooter type game, like let's say the game Overwatch or the game Valorant or other strategy games, in many of those games, the field of play is much larger than you get in a single camera angle. You compare that to something like Super Smash Brothers, which is kind of a side-scrolling fighting game many are probably familiar with, and you're not really going to miss the shot. But in many of these games, you can and often are in the wrong place in terms of capturing the action. So that observer role is one of the more unique roles for esports because you have to have so much knowledge specific to that game. In terms of tournaments, that's usually a separate function from production. They are called tournament operators, or they might be called admins, short for tournament administrators. And they're more like the league operators and the referees. So it's all about having very well-defined rules that are published ahead of time for that tournament. It's about enforcement of those rules. It's about making a lot of tough calls because your rules never cover 100% of the circumstance. It's about managing the culture of the community, because particularly if this is online, you do have to watch things like toxicity and use of language. It's as if this was a heated basketball match and everyone has a live mic and they might be 18 years old and in the heat of competition. And there's a reason sports doesn't do a lot of interviews right during that time, because people are mainly playing to win and they're very focused and they're very heated. And but imagine that audience has access to voice chat and text chat. So, how do you moderate that? And you have to worry a lot about competitive integrity. Most people don't realize how much cheating goes into this. Just like anything else, there are third-party applications that will let a player see behind walls or automatically aim track their opponent or move more quickly. And you as a tournament operator, back to your question, need to have the expertise and the tools to try to really minimize that as much as you can and identify and have the right consequences if someone is found guilty of that.
Okay. And so you shared the nuts and bolts of the actual tournament and how that works. Let's just switch because I see the questions piling up. So I know the community is excited to hear from you there. Let's talk about even some of the revenue. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. How are people or organizations, company, even players, how are they making money? And it's probably an exhaustive list, but if you can give us some ways that outside of tournament play, even how are people making revenue?
So it very much depends on what kind of entity the company is, and that affects their business model. And really, some are more mature right now, and some are still very emerging and developing. The game development and publishing business is quite mature. It's still growing, but the business model is very clear. You make a game that people enjoy. You might have charged $60 for a copy in the past, but more and more the revenue is through ongoing support of that game as a service. So more like a TV show than a movie. You're not one and done every Christmas, although that still happens with major console franchises. But most of the money in the industry comes from games that are live operations. And every 2 to 4 weeks, the publisher puts out a new update, and that drives engagement. Same reason I'm tuning in to watch the latest episode of the show that I care about. But inside that show, there are going to be items for me as a fan to buy, digital items. And so all of the recent talk about metaverse and Web3, NFTs, all of that heat, gaming's been doing this, not on top of those technologies, but doing this, meaning monetize fandom through digital items for decades. And it continues to get better and better at that. So that's how a game publisher drives revenue, and that's a lot of revenue. Again, that's where they create the bulk of the value in the ecosystem right now, and they get most of the financial returns. If you're an event organizer, then it might be through participation fees. So a person is coming as a competitor, and they're paying some fee. And typically maybe half of that might go to the prize pool that is available for that event. But the other primary revenue stream is sponsorships, like traditional sports, where, okay, this tournament is brought to you by a Coca-Cola or someone else. And that brand is integrated into the on-site experience and into the live stream, and maybe physical elements on the studio desk, like the sportscaster's desk, product placement. very comparable to sports. Then on the player side, people, it makes their heads kind of explode that someone's getting paid for being good at video games. But once you understand that, it's actually gotten very specialized. It used to be that I, as a player, I would play in some tournaments and I might win money by winning. And I would also manage my own social media network and I could monetize that. These days, very good video game players tend to specialize more, and they're doing both. And then at some point they're picking a path to say, I'm going to be a competitor where I'm compensated based on my skill in winning or helping my team win. And that's going to be primarily what I do, is I get good at one particular video game, and teams will want to sponsor me, and I will have an agent, and there will be windows when I can be traded, and all of the elements you see in traditional sports. It's just earlier. If I'm not going to be a competitor, I might be a creator, which is the gaming term for a social media influencer. I'm going to have a following on YouTube. I'm going to live stream on Twitch, the platform that we mentioned before. Maybe these days I'm on TikTok, and I can monetize that numerous ways through ads that the platform's serving. Twitch actually has a very sophisticated monthly subscription product that's very lucrative for streamers. So Todd Harris is a fan of Liberty, the streamer, and I want to pay $5 a month to get special badge, a different set of, emoticons I can use in chat, and maybe access to certain content that you do. Mm-hmm. And that really adds up. That's many millions of dollars a year for the top 10 streamers on Twitch, just through Twitch, separate from any competition. Similarly, for these competitors, the top folks earn many millions of dollars just from combination of being paid by a team and winning tournaments. So that hit a few of the different.
Yeah, no, you did a great way of just pulling everyone together, the platforms, the events, the influencers like Ashley. Erin Ashley Simon is someone that I've been following for some while, and just seeing how that has evolved for her. And Bill, you know what? We need to get into these questions because this is a hot topic today.
Absolutely. Let's do it. First one comes from Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, USA. Where do real sports and esports intersect?
I love it.
Yeah.
Paul, great question. Here's a specific example in our backyard in Atlanta. This isn't a property that our company is directly involved with, but fan-controlled football, arena football played in real life by real football players that are exceptionally talented in about 1,000-person physical location, all live streamed. The audience is watching primarily on Twitch, which means that I, as an audience member, I choose a team that I'm a fan of, and Twitch chat votes on the play that's going to be called. That play goes into the headset of the quarterback, and they run that play. So it's interaction that's driving real sports. Our company has done similar events with wrestling on Twitch, which allows us to be even more over the top, a little more entertainment than competitive integrity in that case. So we love doing that. So I think that esports is learning from sports in terms of storytelling, human interest stories, and just strong production of live events that are compelling. And sports is learning from esports because we were born on digital platforms.
Right.
Sports comes from the physical world and is trying to figure out how to be relevant to Gen Z on the platforms that they watch. Gaming is already the most relevant thing to that demographic. It literally is like oxygen is number 2 and gaming and esports is number 1. The fandom is insane. And but we're learning from sports when it comes to the physical space.
Alex?
You see, we've seen some of the basketball teams actually build their own game teams. The Mavericks, for instance, or not Mavericks, but the Kings here in Sacramento or near Sacramento, have an entire space dedicated just to their game, the online version of their physical game. Do you see a lot of that happening across the leagues?
We do. So most of the NBA teams, as you mentioned, have a team that plays in the game NBA 2K, including the Hawks here in our backyard. Many of the Major League Soccer teams also have a eFIFA team. Atlanta United similarly. And many of the NFL owners have actually invested in esports. This includes Robert Kraft of the Patriots has invested in an esports team, includes Jerry Jones has invested in an esports team. Former athletes, including Shaq, A-Rod, Michael Jordan, they've all invested in esports teams. The reason is pretty simple if you look at the data, which is, I alluded to it before, it's a little concerning if you like traditional sports as I do, but the most recent data, and this is not done by an esports group, it's done by a group that has surveyed youth sports for 20 years. So for young males, of a list of 25 activities, being a fan of a traditional sports team was the lowest of all activities. It was about 8%. Playing video games was about 83%. And so if you are the owner or manager of a traditional sports franchise, regardless of the sport, and you're looking at that data and saying, who's going to be the next generation that's going to come to our stadium, you have to go where the people are. And the people are in video games and esports as you get younger and younger. And that same study said, if you do want to get a young person to be a fan of, say, the Atlanta Braves, it was a little soon for the Atlanta Braves, but who do a great job with fandom. But, you know, the factors that really increase it are you had a parent that is a fan, you as a young person actually play the sport yourself, and most importantly, you play the video game version of the sport. So my speculation, without being able to, of course, speak for them, is the reason the NBA is into playing NBA 2K. That is how young people discover the game of basketball. The reason the MLS teams are playing FIFA, that is how young people today learn that soccer is a thing that you can actually do outside. It's not the other way around. And so, yes, there's going to continue to be more of that.
Yeah, how digital and the online intersect. Next question.
Alex Lindsay, Nevada, California, USA. How do you think the nature of game development for single player options limits the scalability of esports? For instance, we can't play many mainstream sports by yourself, but they are good for TV.
So I think that single player game content will continue to thrive. I don't think it's disappearing. Because it's a very different format than TV and film. I would say that if it's a narrative type of game that is story driven and you, the individual, are driving the story, that does limit esports because it's not really something you're playing competitively. It doesn't limit video content. Many YouTubers have built millions of followers just by doing gameplay videos of them going through single player games. And again, people might not get it, but some people enjoy watching their favorite YouTuber go through a game as much or more than going through the game themselves. So there's still bespoke additional revenue opportunities around single player games besides the game itself, but not quite as many of those as a multiplayer game. The other thing I'll point out is there's a genre of esports called speed running, which is basically, you know, I'm going through a game, and that could be a single player game. It could be a story driven game, a puzzle game, and I'm doing it as quickly as possible. It's unbelievable what these people do. You know, they spend many years looking for every little glitch or exploit or a way to go through it. And that's competitive in itself. It's just asynchronously competitive, where I'm putting up my time and then Alex is trying to beat my time or beat the world record.
All right, Alex, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, my background a little bit is that I've done a lot of worked with a lot of advanced observer tools for a variety of games, and so one of the things that we find really limiting is the nature of the game, because they made it so that you could play it, and you play it and all these things, create all these little pockets. It's something you talked about earlier, where you really have to know the game to know where to shoot and how to shoot and what angles are going to work and everything else. Whereas it really feels like what's missing in the game industry is that it's made by game developers for gamers, as opposed to viewers, which is much more of an arena style system where, a football field can be shot with 30 or 40 cameras with EVSs and all kinds of other things. And that's kind of what as someone who's built ones that visualize the games, you feel like you're missing, is that I don't want a game that I can play on my own. I want a game that is designed for TV. And that's how you get to, in the United States, as an aggregate, there are 50 million, 60 million people watching every Sunday, watching various football games, and, to get to that and to cover it at that level, you need an entirely new infrastructure that doesn't seem to exist right now from the folks like me that have worked on it, and just going, this would be a lot better if we got rid of all this stuff, and just got to something where we could see everything with the cameras.
There's a lot in there. Yeah, there are a lot of great points. I mean, the first point, before you even get to watchability, which is what you're talking about and is very important for helping an esport go more mainstream, is the watchability. How easy is it for me to discern what's going on? The popular sports do that exceptionally well. Before you even get to that, you have to make a game that's incredibly popular, which is it's a hard problem. There are every day on the iPhone about 500 games released daily. On the Xbox and PC platforms like Steam, you have about 30 major, these are the big games, not independents, released every day. So most games will fail commercially. And then of those that do, very few of those will be popular for years upon end. And there's a game design challenge that's hard around making a game that is easy to play, but takes a lifetime to master. It's the old Othello saying, but it's very, very hard to do. And then once you get that right, which only a handful of games on the planet have done, now you're looking at how do you also make that watchable by the audience. And so, as you said, Alex, it's a tough problem. Game developers are definitely thinking about that. But, we're not quite there. I think games that do it exceptionally well, I'm a big fan of the game Rocket League. It's not a game that we made, but it's one of the few games. Rocket League is cars that are playing soccer. Rocket League.
Okay.
Yeah. 3 cars on a team hitting a giant soccer ball to try to hit it in a goal. And the major advantage that it has is that anyone on this call could watch it and they would know when to cheer because the ball went in the goal. That's not the case with most esports games. Most esports games are more like watching chess played very quickly by a team, in which case it's super interesting if you play it, but if you're stumbling on it for the first time, you need someone to explain it to you. But chess is a very well-designed game, still very popular for good reason. So those are some of the trade-offs that the community is working on. And I totally agree, Alex. Most of them are not all that easy to spectate right now, but they're very compelling to play. And fortunately, many of them have millions of players that are invested in it. And so they enjoy watching the same way a chess player enjoys watching chess, even though they may not know what's going on.
Everything that's happening there. Okay, next question.
Comes from John Preto in Las Vegas, USA. I've been reading that esports, the industry, is forecast to increase by 50% or more over the next decade. Where do they expect that significant growth to come from?
Great question, Todd.
So most of the revenue driven in esports, if you don't count the game publishers themselves, most of it comes from corporate sponsorships. It's a strength and a weakness, or, possible exposure point for the industry. In traditional sports, about half of the revenue comes from media rights, where, a particular network or Amazon is, bidding to cover a league or a set of content, and they pay a lot for that, and that trickles through the ecosystem. That doesn't happen so much in esports. Most of the content is free to watch, and those rights fees are not as heavy. So it's mainly corporate sponsorships and partnerships. And because that's the biggest piece of the pie, that needs to grow in order for the esports industry to grow. And I think it will grow, because the reality is, if you look at the time spent in esports and a percentage of leisure time for the most coveted demographic of 18 to 34-year-olds, and you look at the dollars spent, there's just a huge mismatch. I mean, very candidly, a lot of money is being spent still in television, and I hope it does a great job for those brands that are spending it. But I know my kids aren't watching it, and I know their friends aren't watching it. And so if you want to reach that demographic, you have to go where they are. And that's really what is going to drive most of the growth if you're not a game publisher, is companies getting more educated, understanding that this is not a fad. I compare it to the way brands spend on social media now and didn't when social media came out. And then they realize, oh, wait, this is actually where I get more return on investment for my marketing dollar. Yeah, I need some more internal expertise, or I need to find a good partner. That didn't happen overnight. And so that's a similar phase of where we are with esports.
Next question.
JJ McKenna, San Rafael, says, having watched a rise in publication on the Twitch network for gamers, which streaming platform has generated the most activity for the gaming industry at large?
Twitch is where the bulk of live viewership happens. Twitch was bought by Amazon. It's been quite a few years now, $970 million. I'm sure it's worth way more than that now. That was over 5 years ago. The other two platforms in the space, so YouTube has really the biggest audience watching gaming content. It's just that that's more video on demand, pre-recorded content. And if you look at their watch hours, it's a very large number. A couple of years ago, they put out a stat, and basically the amount of gaming content on YouTube watched was equivalent to all of Netflix watched in terms of hours. That's a large audience watching gaming content, but it's pre-recorded, and their live product of watching live is newer and it's earlier, and they have been acquiring content creators. This is a little exception to my media rights comment before, where they are paying dollars to have some of the top content creators leave a platform like Twitch and move exclusively to YouTube for a bit. And then Facebook Live, they continue to invest in the space. They are growing. They're not nearly the same right now in terms of viewer hours, but obviously that's another well-funded company out there.
Next question.
Jason Bache, Albuquerque, New Mexico, here on the panel. Do you expect esports franchises to have large arenas for live performances? Given Twitch and some excellent AV production, I'd imagine a fair amount of marketing would go into selling courtside seats. Then again, Super Bowl tickets are still costly.
Yes, it's all just a matter of when. So right now, there's not enough esports programming in my mind to justify dedicated esports stadiums, because the largest events do sell out stadiums. Here in our backyard, Liberty, you started with the League of Legends semifinals. That's happening at the end of this month. That's going to be played at State Farm Arena, which is where the Hawks play. It's a 20,000 plus seat arena. That semifinal match sold out in 5 minutes. And the finals for that particular game, which will be in California, the finals of that game will see an individual audience of about 100 million uniques watching. So when you hear esports is rising to the level of the Super Bowl, really people are talking about the finals of one particular game that happens to be very big globally, which is League of Legends. And League of Legends can sell out a stadium, but dedicated stadiums, I think, are a little ways off. What you're going to see are more and more multi-use arenas. Our company actually does a little bit of consulting in that space. It's not our primary line of business, but how do you build a venue that is not reliant on esports events, but can accommodate esports events and just has all the great AV equipment that everyone on this call would love, because esports events require screaming internet, electricity, LEDs everywhere, particular layout considerations because of field of view and competitive integrity. And so those might also hold corporate events, music concerts, and other things that are just kind of support that same sort of layout. So that's what I think you're going to see more of over the next few years, multi-use events.
I was just curious, do you think that they really need to be in an arena too? I mean, the question is could, like we've seen esports done in our building has a big stage in it, and they've done it without any audience, distributed out to either a lot of individuals or sent to other venues. And so you have people watching the venue. In a lot of ways, you don't really, I mean, you're watching something created in a video. So, do you really need to see do you need to be in the same space, or could you be in a distributed theater? For instance, IMAX has 150 theaters that are now set up for live. And so you could distribute to theaters, you could distribute to venues without actually having the gamers and the viewers in the same place.
Yep. Yeah. So our facility is similar in that, we have a production studio that is centralized or could be remote controlled. We have a place for players to come and gather in a studio environment, or they could play from their home. 80% of the content we produce doesn't have a live audience and doesn't need a live audience. And we have also distributed content to movie theaters as well. For the Smite World Championship, we partnered with Coke and their theater partners. So you could join, if you couldn't make it to Atlanta for the live event, you go to a Coke partnered theater in LA and you gather with maybe 100 fans instead of thousands of fans. Right. So yeah, esports is great for that. For the biggest events, there's nothing like being in person, though. That it's just still the case. The roar of that crowd. Again, I go to a lot of traditional sports. The fandom of a live esports event is off the hook. There's so much AV. It's like your hypest sports team playing combined with the best EDM or hip hop concert you've ever been to. Right. So the energy level is so off the hook that you will have those and they're not going to go away. And this audience is incredibly social. Again, the stigma is maybe they're in their basement playing. They mainly play because they want to connect with the community. So when you have a chance to bring the community together, you just have you're making lifelong fans, and there's more economic opportunity there as well. Merchandise, food, beverage, tickets, etc. So it's great online. It's better in person.
And for those in the community, I've posted a link in the chat for a web series. It's like 10 plus years old, but it's video game high school. And it will show you both the educational side of it, but then that energy of like when they're playing, as Todd alluded to, when they're actually playing and all the hype around that. So you can go check that out. Next question.
Ranjan Chandil has a question out of Los Angeles that Todd mentioned part of this. The openings for South Koreans' League of Legends have been bigger than any opening for most of the major awards show. What are your favorite openings for esports games?
I think you probably named my favorite. That South Korea soccer field where they had an augmented reality dragon that flew through the crowd. I mean, that was nice. That's probably up there. I'll also say props to Riot, who's the publisher out of LA that makes that game, League of Legends. They've done a really good job with their performers in terms of having, CG anime styled women's group, that they've done original music, original dancing, but it's computer generated characters that are performing it, live or pseudo live. So a lot of this augmented reality tech is pretty cool. I'll also call out, maybe not from an opening ceremonies for the questioner, but as a general event, I got to go to the Fortnite World Championship pre-COVID, which was up in New York, Arthur Ashe Stadium. That event was notable, not only for its scale. There were 60 production trucks involved in that event. You were real-time producing an event that has 100 players, because Fortnite is played in this battle royale format. So 100 live camera feeds simultaneously mixed as a part of the front of house and the online production. So the production technically was impressive, and they probably did the best job making it intergenerational. Outside the event itself, it felt like Disney. So you walked through rope courses, and they had a partnership with Nerf. So you had Nerf styled, props that you were engaging in real world battles. And it was half of the crowd was 12-year-olds grabbing their mom and dad and dragging them. And the other half was mom and dad dragging their 6-year-olds, because it was the mom and dad that was passionate about Fortnite.
Awesome.
So it was nice.
Next question.
JJ McKenna at San Rafael's back with, for streaming large esports, what percentage of the video production relies on cloud platform production versus physical hardware switching?
That's a really good question. And I'm not even going to hazard a guess. I'm just going to simply say, I don't know what percentage it is. Our team would know. Certainly there's been a very strong growth that existed before COVID, but with COVID towards cloud-based solutions. vMix specifically is very popular in the esports space. And so I would say cloud-based production has gotten more popular. Remote production, where the players are together, there's a crowd, but the talent, the commentators may be remote, or even if they are on site, the production truck may be remote. There's a strong trend in that direction, but actually I wouldn't want to hazard a guess on the percentage. I'm just not sure from other production companies how much they're doing in each bucket.
And just a note to our producers, as we're getting to close to the top of the hour, voting is important. So this feels very esportish. So go ahead and vote on the questions that we have left with our time with Todd. Next question.
Rob Collins, Kansas City, Missouri says, how important do you think interactive elements will be in esports streams, such as a viewer being able to pick a camera feed to follow their favorite players, or an overview camera of the field to watch a match play out?
Ooh, Todd.
It's a great question. Yeah, this audience loves interactivity. So the more, the better. Number one, just for those of you who aren't gamers, I'll remind you that the number one thing that distinguishes a video game from other media form is interactivity. The thing that makes it different from film or TV or a book is you are the protagonist. You make choices. You have agency, or at least you feel like you do. That is what makes a game. So this audience is inclined to want to click something and have something happen immediately, and that's why they like games. A platform like Twitch, of course, is interactive with chat. Twitch and other platforms have invested in things like polls, like voting, like predictions. The streamers, when they get a subscription, they have an interactive element, an animation that comes up on the screen, or a GIF, or a meme, or some sound. So when it comes to interactivity of viewer feeds, I think there will be more and more of that. And we've done some of that at World Championships, where you could choose a particular view, and many other esports producers have as well. I would say they haven't quite been able to monetize that yet. Some of the experiments where it's like, hey, you could pay a little bit and get to follow your favorite player around the field. So you're always getting that point of view versus whatever the technical director chooses or the observer chooses. I haven't seen a lot work in terms of monetizing that, but in terms of just additional features for the community, there has been and will continue to be more of that.
Is there any part of like an interactive component that does not work well?
Well, you just have to know what type of content and game you are. You know, if you try to be a Hunger Games type interaction where the audience can vote or pay some money and have a gift come into the playing field, like those experiments have been tried. And I think there's going to be a lot of other interesting blends of game design that take that into account from the beginning, but
Right.
then you have to really lean into that. You're not really the same sort of sport that football is. If I can spend $100 and give you an extra health boost, you're more of an entertainment product. And so it's really just knowing what type of game you are. If you push interactivity and it takes away from the integrity or the spirit or the soul of the game,
Right.
well, you're going to have two communities kind of battling one another versus all being united around why they're there, what sort of content, you know, they're cheering for, that sort
Right.
of thing.
Awesome. Next question.
Tlaloc Miguel Lopez Waterman in San Rafael, California. How does this world treat copyright? Whose content is it? The players, the game manufacturers, somebody else's?
Great question. The game publisher owns the IP of the game. And this is the number one difference between esports and traditional sports. And it's an important question because you know, particularly a few years ago, there were businesses that tried to be built that didn't realize this basic fact that is fundamental. So because basketball is not owned by anyone, any one of us on the call could come up with our own basketball league. We can't use the images of players. We can't use the NBA's logo, but we could come up with our own basketball property and monetize it. You can't do that with a video game. If you're going to build a property and you're going to use any game out there, whether it's NBA 2K or League of Legends or a game made by an indie developer yesterday, you know, and just published on the iStore, you know, on iTunes, App Store, that is owned by the game developer. So it's very important to realize that and have the right operational and broadcast rights for any esports tournament that you do. Then most live streamers, because the game developers realize that the live streamers or YouTube content creators add value to their IP and don't diminish it, most of them are very liberal in giving that. And some do that by default. They say, if you're going to live stream this on Twitch, go for it. But if you're going to do a tournament, you have to look at the rules, and it really varies by publishers. Some are extremely laissez-faire and basically say, as long as you don't have these particular prohibited sponsor categories that are vices, go for it. And others say, no, you're going to need our approval to do an event, and it's also might cost this much money, and we're going to approve every asset. And so they're all over the board in terms of how they work with third parties when it comes to that.
That's a huge question, especially in this creator economy that we have. Next question.
Next question is actually mine from San Diego. If in something like a first-person shooter, how does the observer or observers that are kind of recording the game not give away elements like strategic locations and opponent movements, things that might alter the gameplay outcome? Are active players somehow sequestered away from the public live stream? How does that work?
It's a great question. Yes. So what happens in a on-site live event, it just gets back to making sure that the screens where the audience is watching are not visible to the competitors. And there have been some pretty embarrassing mistakes where that, you know, it was a great production. It's just not something maybe the production company thought about because they hadn't done esports before. And literally the competitors could look up and be like, oh, that's where he's hiding. He's hiding over there in the grass. So that's not good. When it comes to online, often, Bill, the production is just on a couple second delay. That's the easiest way to get around that. Is it's slightly not live, so that any information is getting is not seen real time. There usually are also rules that you can't watch the live stream itself. That varies based on the tournament admin, and again, it can be very hard to enforce in an online setting. So hence the delay. Those are kind of the easiest ways to correct for that.
All right. Next question. We'll answer a few more before wrapping.
Ranjan Shandila from Los Angeles is back again. In esports, does the player own their brand or does a company?
So players own their handle and their brand as long as they've done the right sort of protections around that. And esports, that was the case even before recent NIL policies, because at the amateur level, the NCAA is not involved with esports at the collegiate level. They've taken a statement, and that statement is, we are not at this time involved. And so there's other entities that have filled in that space. But it means that at the amateur level of high school or college, players own their brand. Players could monetize their brand through subscription or brand deals. And that's been the case since before NIL. And then what a team does, or a brand that's sponsoring it, is obviously working out some business relationship where they're either sharing that inventory or representing that inventory. And, that's where there's a lot of detailed conversations and negotiations. But at the end of the day, the player owns their brand. When it comes to the esports team, it actually varies a little bit by league structure. So just the way the NFL structure is very different than golf or NASCAR, every esport is very different in terms of structure. Is it a league, or is it event by event, or a series of tournaments? Is it a closed league, or is it an open league? So in some leagues like Call of Duty and Overwatch, there's a formal franchise agreement between the team owner and the league, and that franchise name can only be used within that league. And in other cases, it's more open. So, and different teams take different philosophies there. Here in Atlanta, a specific example. So, the Overwatch team of Atlanta is known as the Atlanta Reign, and they use the Atlanta Reign moniker in that one game only. So that exists within the franchise of Overwatch. And they're not using that name outside. In the case of the team I'm more involved with, Ghost Gaming, I'll rep my Arcane merch right here. So in the case of Ghost Gaming, we only participate in leagues where we can use the IP Ghost across multiple games. So when we play Rocket League, we're Ghost Rocket League. We have different players that play Valorant or Fortnite. They're different players, but they're still called Ghost and repping Ghost. That's more common in esports. It's more like collegiate branding. Our Georgia Bulldog friends, they have a different team playing football than basketball. They're always the Bulldogs, and they have a common back-end organization that helps with training and sells sponsorships and support. So it's typically more like that, but not always.
Next question.
JJ McKenna, San Rafael, and I'm laughing because of the way he phrased this. How well does esports reach different people that have watched sweatier sports? Are there strategies to reach traditional audiences?
I like that. I don't know. Esports athletes sweat more than you would think, actually. It's similar to the study they did about masters chess players. Like even in chess, you burn some insane amount of calories. And it's the same with esports. But yes. So how well do sports reach traditional sports fans? This is where the sports sim games are very helpful. So NBA 2K, Madden, MLB The Show, FIFA, those are really great crossover games. And you have a lot of examples of traditional sports events that might also have a showcase in one of those games. So that's a helpful way to bridge the worlds. The other helpful way, many sweaty sport athletes are also gamers these days. It's not like when I was growing up and you had your nerds and you had your jocks and they were different. Now it's all kind of one. And so you will also have many people who are famous for playing traditional sports, and they want to give themselves a longer career and expand their platform. So they start streaming on Twitch, or they make the occasional TikTok of them playing a game. And so these worlds are definitely coming more and more together.
All right. So we are going to, I've got, looks like 2 more questions, and then we'll get you on your way, Todd. This has been fantastic so far. Let's go to the next one, Bill.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. How will the MetaQuest $1,500 headset that we talked about in the first hour impact esports potentially?
I'm going to say not that much in the short term, honestly. VR esports are not that big. I love VR as a consumer, a user, but there's not that many installed units compared to other platforms like the personal computer or certainly the mobile phone. The growth in esports is more going to be from the PC to the mobile phone, back to accessibility and impact. Again, like, what is the true mainstream esport that everybody's playing and everybody's watching? Back to Alex's point. Well, VR just puts more cost or equipment obstacles versus the device that everyone's carrying around in their pocket, where you can practice the equivalent of your free throws while your mom is driving you to school. That's what esports is. You're getting in your reps constantly, and reps are slowed by having to put a piece of hardware on your head. So there'll be some cool opportunities there. There will definitely be some VR esports plays. There'll be more physical location based, where you're in a social setting and maybe you're having some food and drink and you're playing or watching your friends play. It's not going to be the scalability that gets the viewership of the Super Bowl, which, again, esports is already there and we're just getting started.
Todd, thank you so much for this past hour. And I don't know if you're able to see, there's still so many questions. So we'll definitely have to have you come back. But I want to give you the stage for a final word for our community.
Yeah, well, thanks for the awesome questions. That was great. I'm glad you guys are interested in the topic. I love talking to the esports curious. So I'd love to continue the conversation. I would say for anyone who wants more information, there's 2 social platforms that I am active on, LinkedIn and Twitter. On both of those, I'm at Todd Allen Harris. So drop me a connect, drop me a question. I put a fair bit of content out around these topics there. If you really want to deep dive, I will push an event that we have going on in Atlanta in the middle of November, which is called Esports Summit. There are multiple esports summits out there around the world because the community is all learning together. But if you go to esportssummit.live, LIVE, you will stumble upon ours. This is a 2-day business summit that combines people working in the esports industry with the gaming as education community, which we didn't get into on this episode, but is a passion of mine. How in K through 12 and higher ed are games and esports disrupting and innovating the education system. So these communities come together. The leaders in these fields will be present at the conference. And after this 2-day business conference, there's a 2-day consumer festival called DreamHack. It's an international festival that is coming to Atlanta. So you get some business knowledge, and also you can see, if you haven't seen before, a true consumer event with about 20,000 attendees. And that is
the best of both worlds.
Yeah. And honestly, that's my number one, whether you make it to this advice or not, if you can attend a live esports event, that is the most important way for you to learn about this, is actually find when a live event is happening and show up there. And that will open a lot of eyes, give you a lot of connectivity.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much, Todd. And to our producers, thank you for, again, all of your questions and just the conversation happening in the chat. For our panelists, your answers are what drive the show. And to our back end team, this show could not be possible without you. And the schedule for this week, we've got an amazing week for you. Tomorrow will be Presentations 2.0, Death by PowerPoint, like we're going to stop the madness. And on Wednesday, it'll be our first audio day on a Wednesday. So moving from Tuesday to Wednesday, and it'll be Dante Audio 101. And then Thursday, I might have to come back for Thursday, Loop Back and Audio Hijack. And if you want the rest of the schedule, just head over to officehours.global, and we'll see everybody else in after hours. Thank you all again. It
was amazing.
Yes. So great job, Todd. When we start whispering over the credits. Thank you so much.
Sure. Awesome. We need an arena. I'm just telling you.
Yeah. Yes. Hopefully I'll see you at the end of this month.
Marathon. That's what we
Marathon.
Bring marathon back. That's all I'm saying. It's all about marathon. Oh, wow.